Rebecca showed up in black, still mourning her father, only to be handed a termination letter by the very boss who had approved her leave. No warning, no explanation. Just a cold smile and security waiting. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The elevator ride down from the 21st floor felt longer than it ever had. Rebecca stood still, clutching her purse to her chest like it was a shield, her knuckles pale against the leather. The faint scent of her father's aftershave, still clinging to the funeral pamphlet inside, fought against the sterile office air, anchoring her in a moment that already felt stolen. The steel walls reflected her. Dark clothes, puffy eyes, the ghost of a daughter who had just buried the man who taught her how to fight with her words, not her fists. Her mouth was set, unyielding, but her stomach curled like a paper burning slow. The lobby came into view as the elevator doors opened with a soft ding. Derek from security waited by the revolving doors, expressionless behind the desk. He didn't say a word, just nodded at her with professional pity. It landed like an insult. Rebecca's heels clicked on the polished tile. A sound she once loved, confident, decisive, now felt like the march of the condemned. No one made eye contact. Not the intern she had mentored, not the woman from finance who once asked for her help preparing a maternity leave proposal, not even Jacob from HR who always greeted her with, "Morning sunshine." They turned to their screens, their phones, their coffee cups, as if grief were contagious and betrayal her own doing. She pushed open the glass doors. The cold January wind slapped her face. It didn't matter. She welcomed the sting. The city hummed around her. Indifferent. Taxis hissed through puddles. Men in suits shouted into Bluetooth headsets. A woman with a stroller passed by, humming tunelessly. And Rebecca Carter stood there in her funeral dress, on the sidewalk outside the building she had given 8 years of her life to, with nothing in her hand but a folder labeled "Exit Documents," and the weight of her father's folded flag still fresh in her mind. But even in that moment, raw and hollow and abandoned, there was no panic, no collapse. The pain was sharp, yes, and the betrayal ran deep. But beneath it all, something ancient stirred. Something her father had whispered when she was 15 and came home crying after being cheated out of a debate trophy. If you let them take your fire, they win. You stand tall, even when you're the last one standing. Rebecca inhaled slowly. Then she turned east, toward the subway, the wind curling the hem of her coat like a challenge. She would not vanish. And Meredith Shaw would soon learn, some losses do not leave people broken. They leave them sharpened. The evening air outside her apartment was still, heavy with that winter silence that blankets a city not with peace, but with a kind of waiting. Rebecca sat at her desk, the apartment dim except for the halo of her laptop screen. 8 years' worth of files blinked back at her, each one neatly organized, time-stamped, dated, cross-referenced. No bitterness, no haste, just method, like the soldier's daughter she was. Meredith Shaw had built her empire on fear, charisma, and plausible deniability. She demanded loyalty, disguised exploitation as opportunity, and spoke in phrases that always left her just enough room to retreat. Just make it cleaner. We need to control the narrative. You know how to spin it, Rebecca. Each directive came with a smile and just enough menace behind the eyes to ensure obedience. But Rebecca never deleted. Not out of defiance, but principle. Truth, even buried, had a weight. And now that weight was hers to wield. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, assembling the dossier like a surgeon closing an incision. Precise, intentional, cold. Attached were emails in which Meredith authorized the falsification of a quarterly report to prevent a board inquiry. screenshots of Slack messages where she mocked a whistleblower before forcing them out, memos instructing Rebecca to delay the disclosure of an environmental compliance failure for a major energy client until after contract renewal. And there, buried in metadata, Meredith's own edits on a document that redirected funds meant for diversity training to cover the renovation of her private executive suite. It was all there. Years of quiet corruption dressed in corporate language, now stripped bare. The report wasn't a bomb. It was a scalpel, designed to cut precisely, to sever Meredith from the illusion of untouchability. But even vengeance had logistics. She opened her encrypted mail client. 3 messages queued and ready. 1 to the board, 1 to Beacon Energy's compliance team, and 1 to a freelance journalist who owed her a favor and never ignored a juicy lead. All time-stamped for 9:00 a.m. Monday. Rebecca sat back, exhaled, and almost laughed. This wasn't rage. This was justice with receipts. Then her phone lit up. Cole Hendricks. Incoming call. She answered with a nod he couldn't see. Still offering me a desk with a view? Only if you bring that beautiful brain with you, he replied. She glanced at the folder labeled Process Optimization Model, Final Draft. The same model Meredith once tried to pass off as hers in front of the board. I'll bring the fire, Rebecca said. You bring the match. The collapse wasn't loud. It was surgical. No alarms, no sirens, just the sound of control slipping through fingers that once gripped it like a vice. By the morning of the 3rd day, Grafton & Wills was bleeding from every headline. Consulting firm rocked by scandal. Whistleblower suppression exposed. Emails reveal culture of fear. The screenshots weren't ambiguous. Meredith's own words. Kill the leak before it reaches legal. He's a risk. Make him resign or destroy his credibility. Were front and center on a dozen news sites. Her language wasn't corporate. It was clinical, predatory, damning. And suddenly, the woman who prided herself on polished detachment became the face of corruption in a viral PR nightmare. Inside the firm, chaos settled like dust in a room with no ventilation. Phones rang without pause. Legal huddled in silence behind closed doors. HR walked tight-lipped through the hallways. Employees avoided eye contact, each one calculating their distance from the implosion, each trying to remember what they might have forwarded, what they might have said, what Meredith might have said to them. Power, once centralized in a single office lined with glass and designer furniture, now existed in a vacuum. The board convened in what one insider called a war room atmosphere. There was no debate, just damage assessment. Meredith was removed before the next news cycle. The official memo read, terminated for cause. But no memo could cauterize a hemorrhage. The final artery to snap was Beacon Energy, a client worth tens of millions annually. They issued a public statement within hours of the leak's second wave. We have terminated our contract with Grafton & Wills effective immediately due to serious ethical breaches at the executive level. The language was precise, cold, corporate vengeance delivered in its most sophisticated form, and at the bottom of it, Rebecca's quiet influence. The compliance director who signed it had once been a junior analyst she'd trained. Across the street, Ellison Global timed their announcement perfectly. Rebecca Carter joins Ellison as Executive Director of Corporate Ethics. Her LinkedIn post, elegant in its brevity, read, "Grief is a strange tutor. After losing my father, I thought I'd lost my footing. But sometimes, what breaks us is what roots us." It was shared over 100,000 times within 2 days. Comments flooded in, former interns, ex-colleagues, silent allies, all voicing what they'd never dared say before. You deserved better. Now they know it. Inside Grafton, resumes quietly slipped into Rebecca's inbox. She replied to each one, politely, professionally, never cruel, but never forgetful. The ballroom at the Marston Conference Center was carved from polished oak and soft lighting, its silence thick with expectation. Rebecca Carter stood at the podium, framed by a minimalist banner that read, "National Summit on Corporate Ethics, Building Trust in Turbulent Times." No teleprompter, no script. Just her, in a charcoal blazer that fit like a second skin, a quiet force of poise and clarity. She didn't begin with numbers or case studies. She began with stillness. "When I was younger," she said, voice low but unshakable, "I believed integrity meant never making a mistake. I was wrong. Integrity is knowing where the line is and refusing to let anyone move it." Chairs shifted, heads lifted. Executives, compliance officers, general counsels. They listened, not out of obligation, but out of reverence. Rebecca spoke of ethical erosion not as a scandal, but as a slow disease, not of villains, but of compromises too small to notice until they hollowed an entire organization. Her words didn't accuse, they illuminated, calm, measured, surgical. She never named Meredith, never mentioned Grafton and Wills, but in the room, everyone knew the story. The headlines were still recent, and they knew she was the reason a reckoning had come, not with fury, but with precision. When she said, "Sometimes walking away isn't surrender, it's strategy," the room froze, and when she followed it with, "And sometimes the most ethical act is refusing to stay silent," the standing ovation began before her last syllable had settled. Backstage, amid murmurs and handshakes, Rebecca slipped away into a quiet corridor. Her hands were steady, but her chest rose and fell like someone remembering how to breathe again. She pulled out her phone, not for a call, not for a selfie, but for something sacred. It was still there. The last message from her father, a text that had felt cryptic once, but now read like scripture. "If they ever betray you, don't fight dirty. Fight smart. And never lose your dignity." Her thumb hovered over it, not to delete, but to etch it deeper into memory. Outside, the wind rattled the lobby's revolving doors. Somewhere in Kansas, a woman who once wore power like perfume was rehearsing answers to questions at a logistics firm that didn't care about her past because it had no future to offer her. Rebecca didn't feel triumph. She felt closure. Justice hadn't roared. It had whispered through truth, moved like shadow through corridors of silence, and arrived not with spectacle, but with grace.